Hey y'all, just real quick before we dive into the main program, I just want to give a quick word about the platform that I'm using, Anchor FM. It's been a good platform so far with the program and just distributing. It's a multi-platform sort of deal, so it sends out to Spotify, Google, iTunes, a whole list of hosting sites. So it's definitely a good place to start if you're a beginner or who wants to step into this field. You really don't need any experience at all. You just do it, right? So the sponsorship has been a good deal for me so far, and definitely a good way to build on the program that you want to distribute or you want to record. So yeah, so definitely check it out, Anchor FM. Also, if you want to skip these sponsorship intros, you can go to my Patreon, Collapse Talk, and for $1 you can get early access, ad-free access, as well as other exclusive content that I build on and work on. So definitely check it out there, Patreon. But yeah, so now without further ado, we will jump into the main program. Hello, y'all. Welcome back. This is episode 26 of Collapse Talk. This is your host, Gabriel. And what can I say? This has been an eventful start for the new year, and at least the first month, and we'll see how things unfold. But of course, we have a new administration now. I'm recording on day 3. So, yeah, we're just living in a new, as Joe Biden says, a new era, a new day for America. And he's technically correct in that sense, but not in the way him and the blue MAGA people would like to think. But before I continue on, there's been I've been doing a lot of thinking and just reflecting on, of course, just the general direction of the show and my work, and really just wanting to say a couple things, at least in regards to some past views, or at least the people that I've listened to in the past. And so with this insurrection is what it is. It's really a defining moment, at least for conservative or alt-right talkers or online personalities. And I'm not really in any position to call anybody out. In fact, there's a lot of people who could probably call me out, and rightfully so. But it is interesting to me because I was fully entrenched in like a socialist worldview, and of course I'm still very much a socialist. Of course, now I've understood that I'm more of a libertarian socialist. Just doing more research on my where my worldview aligns, but it's I was so entrenched, especially in the beginning of the show, and of course as things have heated up throughout the year, I was telling myself, maybe I need to break this echo chamber. Maybe I need to listen to alternate sources. Of course, I knew where to avoid, or at the very least, I would listen, but I would be able to tell myself, okay, this is obviously incorrect, So there were moments where I was listening to Steven Crowder or Ben Shapiro, but I could tell obviously that this is not the correct worldview to have. And then there are folks like Tim Pool, which I know I've mentioned on this program before, and mainly because he does come across as, oh, I'm just a skater dude, anarcho dude. He described himself as such in the past. And of course, in this election cycle, he's heavily for Trump and downplaying at least, his role in the insurrection. Or it's, as I said, this is really a turning point for those who aided and abetted the conspiracies, the election fraud conspiracies. Not that they abetted QAnon conspiracies, but it's just, people that I did listen to, even if I disagreed with them, I still would still be able to respect something. Now, of course, this is a very different, they're held in a very different light, at least in my view. And yeah, it's just interesting. At least, that's just my piece in talking. But, now, of course, when I'm listening to them and listening to that, how they were kind of downplaying this insurrection or coup attempt, saying that it's not a coup. Well, yeah, that's why it's called a coup attempt. But, again, there's so much that we can discuss with this whole Capitol Hill building attack that's still very fresh in people's minds, and just the effects that QAnon has had. So I'm going to just talk in length later on, but I want just to open up at least with the, for those who have made it listen to me and heard me talk about these personalities. Again, I'm very new to this online arena, if I'm being honest, this political commentary arena. So yeah, it's interesting to see how you could, in some ways, okay, I can kind of respect this person, and then learn more and more and realize, okay, this is not really something that I should be listening to or take seriously. So yeah, but that being said, and again, I really don't want to call people out like this, so I'm not going to dwell too long on this, but it's just something that I want to open up with. But anyway, we can talk real quickly about this insurrection and just the effects historically that this is going to have. But I do find it you see a lot of people still trying to downplay it, still trying to say how this isn't what it is, or it's this completely demonstrated what the right, or whatever this faction of this mob. I really don't know. This is straight out of other white nationalist uprisings in the past. I mean, it's literally the same thing. Yeah, we can talk further. I wanted to at least look at Wikipedia's piece on this. There's a link on this, but I just wanted to read at least the opening paragraph. And there's so many different footnotes and so many different citations. So this is definitely something. I mean, this is crazy how at least 2 weeks ago, and this is the start of something. Who knows? But anyway, this is talking about the storming of the United States Capitol. Quote, was a riot and violent attack against the 117th United States Congress at the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021. It was carried out by a mob of supporters of Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States, in an attempt to overturn his defeat in the 2020 presidential election. The riot led to the evacuation and lockdown of the Capitol and 5 deaths. Call to action by Trump. Thousands of his supporters gathered in Washington, D.C. on January 5th and 6th in support of his claim that the 2020 election had been stolen from him, and to demand that Vice President Mike Pence and Congress reject President-elect Joe Biden's victory. In the morning of January 6th, at a Save America rally on the Ellipse, Rudy Giuliani called for trial by combat. Donald Trump Jr. threatened the president's opponents by saying, "We're coming for you," having previously called for total war. And Trump repeated his false claims about election irregularities and told the crowd to, quote, fight like hell, end quote. At the president's encouragement, thousands of the crowd then walked to the Capitol, where a joint session of Congress was beginning the electoral vote count to formalize Biden's victory. Many of the crowd at the Capitol, some of whom had gathered earlier, breached the police perimeters and stormed the Capitol building. These rioters occupied, vandalized, and looted parts of the building for several hours. Many became violent, assaulting Capitol police officers and reporters, erecting a gallows on the Capitol grounds, and attempting to locate lawmakers to take hostage and harm. They chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," blaming him for not rejecting the Electoral College votes. Although he lacked constitutional authority to do so, the rioters targeted House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, vandalizing and looting her offices, as well as those of other members of Congress. Upon security being breached, Capitol Police evacuated the Senate and House Representatives chambers. Several buildings in the Capitol complex were evacuated and all were locked down. Rioters occupied and ransacked the empty Senate chamber, while federal law enforcement officers drew handguns to defend the evacuated House floor. Improvised explosive devices were found near the Capitol grounds, as well as at offices of the Democratic National Committee, the Republican National Committee, and in a nearby vehicle. 5 people, including Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, died from the events, while dozens more were injured. Trump initially resisted sending D.C. National Guard to quell the mob. In a Twitter video, he called the... Okay, I'm going to take a break for a second. But this was amazing. This video, I'm sorry. Like, this it's still, like, hilarious that he came out. He's saying, "Oh, it's still stolen, but please go home." Like, okay, let me continue. In a Twitter video, he called the rioters very special and told them to go home in peace while repeating his false election claims. It's just brilliant. The Capitol was cleared of rioters by mid-evening, and the counting of the electoral votes resumed and was completed in the early morning hours. Pence declared President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris victors and affirmed that they would assume office on January 20th. Pressured by his administration as the threat of removal and numerous resignations, Trump later committed to an orderly transition of power in a televised statement. The events were widely condemned by political leaders and organizations in the United States and internationally. Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, now Senate Minority Leader, that's my little input, called the storming of the Capitol a failed insurrection provoked by the president's lies and said that the Senate will not bow to lawlessness or intimidation. Several social media and technology companies suspended or banned Trump's account from their platforms, and many business organizations cut ties with him. A week after the riot, the House of Representatives voted to impeach Trump for incitement of insurrection, making him the only U.S. president to have been impeached twice. Opinion polls showed that a large majority of Americans disapproved of the storming of the Capitol and of Trump's actions leading up to and following it, although some Republicans supported the attack or did not blame Trump for it. The FBI has opened more than 170 investigations into the events and indicated that many more are likely to come. Dozens of people present at the riot were later found to be listed in the FBI's terrorist screening database, most as suspected white supremacists. Members of the Oath Keepers anti-government paramilitary group were indicted on conspiracy charges for allegedly staging a planned mission in the Capitol. So this is a pretty big header, honestly, for a Wikipedia article. But this is such a huge moment in history, in American history. And I think it's symbolic of the legacy of white supremacy or white nationalism, whatever you want to call it, in the United States. Because only white people could get away with this. And only white people could get the excuses that we're seeing. And, I mean, we saw a direct dichotomy. I've made some criticisms of Black Lives Matters, and some of it may have been misguided. I'm not a black, I don't believe in black separatism. And, of course, that's not what the movement's for, which is good. But you definitely saw a clear response from the police and from law enforcement from these two different rallies, because it really is speechless. It really, like, you can't really comprehend the racial dynamic in this country. But this really this shows just for the whole world. And of course, people want to downplay it, or they don't want to admit it. But this I said on the show that we were in the position where Donald Trump could launch a coup, and here we are. So, this isn't when I was because I was working when I was watching the initial speech and just him, saying his stuff, and I'm just like, okay, whatever. And then half an hour later, looking back, they're storming the Capitol building. I wasn't like shocked or like scared. I was just like, oh my goodness, they're doing it. They're really doing it. So I'm just, again, it's so stupid. It's not, for me, it's not scary. I mean, of course, it'd be terrifying because I'm living in Trump country, and thankfully nobody, at least not yet, has acted out. But, at the very least for this moment, it was just like, what? This is so dumb. And then 5 people died. And again, I'm going back to my talk about Tim Pool because he's talking about this one terrorist or insurrectionist. I mean, it's terrorism, but it's really like laughable because it was obviously going to fail. But I mean, at the same time, security was so underprepared that they were pretty close to doing some serious damage. I mean, like these people, and okay, these people who are Tim Pool or whether other commentators trying to downplay the actions here. Well, what if this had succeeded and they actually got a hold of Mike Pence or a hold of AOC, and then something horrific would have happened to them, and they would just be like they would have they couldn't say anything. It's Antifa, and of course they're also pointing to the Sullivan kid who has infiltrated events like this, alt-right events, but they're pretending that this one kid orchestrated the entire invasion or the insurrection. Again, I have so much to say, so of course I'm kind of going all over the place. But okay, let's look at the deaths. Let's look at Ashley Babbitt, if we can find her. But that they act as though they were just like, oh, this is so sad, and of course anybody dying from this is tragic. But these are radicalized, or whatever you want to call it, cultists. Yeah, here we go. Okay, I was just reading through this article. So during the riot, Ashley Elizabeth Babbitt, a 35-year-old from San Diego, was fatally shot by Capitol Police as she attempted to climb through a shattered window in a barricaded door leading into the speaker's lobby, which has direct access to the House floor. The incident was recorded on several cameras. Babbitt was unarmed when she was shot and killed. However, the officers were aware that many rioters and intruders could be carrying concealed weapons. The D.C. Metropolitan Police Department launched an investigation into the death, and the officer who shot her was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. Babbitt was a follower of QAnon and had tweeted the previous day, "The storm is here," quote, "The storm is here," a reference to a QAnon conspiracy theory. So, yes, she was unarmed, and it's sad that she had to get shot, but she wasn't jumping through that window to hug that officer. And in a situation like this, it's very much like zombie rules, so if one jumps through, then there's obviously more that are going to jump through, so you just got to start opening fire. So, anyway. Oh my god, what a clusterfuck. I'm kind of glad I waited, because I have so much to say. And I've been trying to organize how I'm going to respond to this, how I'm going to organize it. Yeah. So, as I said, this is a defining moment for the QAnon conspiracy. I mean, yeah, Chew on Head, she said it best, that QAnon has had disastrous effects on the boomer generation. And I'm glad that I never I don't know too much about it, if I'm being honest, and I'm glad I don't, because it's just autistic not to be ableist. But yeah, man, this is a whole piece, and Wikipedia isn't exactly the most viable source, but this is there's so many different references and footnotes here. let's see here. So they're going over the terminology because so many people are trying to determine if this is an insurrection or an attack or whatever. All right, so the events have variously been described as treason, insurrection, sedition, domestic terrorism. I think that applies, all of them. An attempt by Trump to carry out a coup d'etat or self-coup, and the biggest challenge to American democracy since the Civil War. The term stormed the Capitol was mentioned 100,000 times in the 30 days preceding the event. So they were obviously like going to do it. This is like, okay, 100,000 times in the 30 days preceding the event. Many of these were in viral tweet threads, which included details on how to enter the building. The term storm has particular resonance in QAnon discourse. Adherents have often referred to a coming storm in which the cabal, which allegedly controls the U.S., will be destroyed. Man, this is... Because, look, I'm all about conspiracies, but this is something else. And I think... What I think is also telling is that a lot on the left... I think they're upset about the double standard, but also that, like... The fact that a bunch of white nationalists actually got away with storming the Capitol building, because I'm sure plenty on the left, plenty of Antifa types, plenty of the commie types, they definitely want to do exactly that and storm the Capitol building. But obviously, the police and National Guard wouldn't like just, oh snap, what's happened? They would obviously be ready for this. So there certainly is an insider aspect to this, and there is that report of that one representative, what's called Lauren Boebert. Okay, this is her Wikipedia page. Is an American politician, businesswoman, and gun rights activist, serving as a U.S. representative for Colorado's 3rd Congressional District since 2021. A member of the Republican Party, she is the first woman to represent her district, which covers the western part of the state, in Congress. And I want to see if they have her... Here we go. Because I have a whole piece on her role. So, this is a segment, paragraph on her role in the storming of the Capitol. On January 5th, the day before the storming of the Capitol, Boebert tweeted, "Remember these next 48 hours. These are some of the most important days in American history." On January 6th, in the hours before the Capitol was attacked, Boebert tweeted, "Today is 1776, a reference to the American Revolutionary War. During the counting of the Electoral College votes, Boebert objected to counting Arizona's votes in a speech to the joint session of Congress. She said, 'The members who stand here today and accept the results of this concentrated, coordinated, partisan effort by Democrats, where every fraudulent vote cancel out the vote of an honest American, have sided with the extremist left.' Democratic politicians accused Boebert and her colleague Doug Lamborn of helping incite violence during the January 6th storming of the United States Capitol. While the Capitol was being stormed, Boebert posted information on Twitter about the police response and the location of members, including the Speaker Nancy Pelosi, had left the chamber. She has faced calls to resign for endangering members' safety. Boebert's communication director resigned on January 16th in response to the events of January 6th. So, effectively, she was tweeting out information to the insurrectionists. Why is it that, like, and I know this is sounding a bit crass, but, you know, why is it that these QAnon conspiracy theorists, conservative women, why is it that because Boebert's cute, but I'm like, God damn it, you're crazy. Like, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to go back because this is a professional program. But yeah, so many different Congress members who were objecting to this Electoral College vote, you know, like Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley. I mean, I don't think anybody knew who Josh Hawley was until he teamed up with Bernie. I never heard of him, certainly. And his time in the sun has certainly ended. Wow. Like, he was fist bumping the people, like, the people, my people. Yeah, like, God, this is so... Wow, man. This is truly I shouldn't say historic day, just a historic event, or... This is certainly, again, as I said, a defining moment, a telling moment for people on where you stand. And, you know, on the topic of whatever war we're getting into. As I said, like, I never wanted to pick sides to begin with, but it's obviously now like which side are you going to be on? Like, I think about it like if I was in Eastern Europe and I had to deal with the communists or the Nazis, obviously I want to work with the communists. So, in this situation, if I have to deal with literal white supremacists, I mean, like, this attack clearly shows why the Second Amendment also applies to liberals and lefties. Like, so, yeah, I don't think I have to explain why I'm a gun owner after this. Anyway, so that's really the attack there. And I don't want to stay on this for too long because I'm sure there's so many others who have exposed this, who have covered it, and I'm sure there's gonna be like a whole like documentary just on like the whole course of events. It's really gonna be like, wow, like, forget 9/11 conspiracies. This is the, like, forever is going to be examined for real. This is like, historians are going to look over this. If there's historians after all this, they're going to look at this as like a defining moment. So regardless, we had 5 people dead, unfortunately, and plenty of others, injured, officers injured. Yeah, it's just crazy. So we'll just move on, but we can also talk not only about this Capitol building attack, but just the effects of QAnon and what this is really about, because it's a marketing scheme. It really is. And there's a piece here by Medium.com just talking about QAnon as probably one of the most successful pyramid schemes of all time, really. And of course, the QAnon and the whole MAGA train, and it's all a marketing scheme around white nationalism, racism. I mean, anyway, this is peak stupidity. I don't know how we can have a country with these people. And I don't mean it to say it like that, because I really don't. I don't. These are, of course, Americans, and if they were less misguided, then I wouldn't have any issue with them. But, like, anyway, so QAnon is, the article, as it says from Medium, is QAnon is a brilliant pyramid scheme, marketing lessons from America's craziest conspiracy cult. And this intro is kind of like dramatic, so I'm going to do my trailer voice. There is a global cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles in Congress. The CIA is harvesting adrenochrome from children's brains. Hillary Clinton runs a sex dungeon under a pizza parlor. And time-traveling lizards are ruling the world. Okay, so I'm going to just do my normal voice. And millions of people believe it. 6% of the voting public may be QAnon conspiracy supporters. They now have believers in Congress. How did QAnon, a gathering of isolated people from the fringes of society and online message boards, coalesce into one of the fastest growing political movements in American history? More importantly, what can QAnon teach us about market psychology and human nature? Here are just a few lessons. So the first one, find a hole in the market. QAnon filled a massive leadership vacuum. As the president and his allies launch volley after volley in their ongoing assault against democracy and civil discord, QAnon filled in the details, providing thought leadership for millions of citizens who are disenfranchised by the political process. For the first time in generations, they had a real say in the direction of the country. Go big. Now, I have to go back to my translation. So it's the big lie. Große Lüge. Yeah, the big lie is an expression coined by Adolf Hitler to describe a gross distortion or misrepresentation of the facts. A lie so colossally massive that no one would believe that someone could have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. One such example that Germany was not beaten in World War I, but rather it was betrayed by the Jews. This one big lie led to the murder of millions. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, said, "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for so much time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension the truth is the greatest enemy of the state." That's what thousands of books and articles have claimed. Goebbels said, "In truth, there isn't a single reputable source for the quote, but it sounds like something he'd say, doesn't it? That's the point. You can lie big. The bigger, the better. Just make sure there's the slightest shade of reality to make it feel like the truth. From there, the sheer audacity of the lie will do the rest. Society, for the record, believes all sorts of state-supported big lies. The American state is doing its best to shield people from the political and economic consequences of the big lie that free market corporatism is the best way to create widespread well-being. We are now entering the dissent repression phase. Tell the truth, but not the whole truth." Number 3. Almost every QAnon theory started with a germinating truth before morphing into a crossbred poison ivy Venus flytrap. No, Hillary doesn't run a pizza-based child brothel, but let's face it, Jeffrey Epstein did run a child rape ring, and a whole bunch of very powerful people, including Bill Clinton and the Donald, were on his Rolodex. The reality is that child abuse is rampant in America and every other country, and if you hate someone enough, it's not a hard leap to make. Consider a few other small sourced facts that QAnon has used as a launchpad for rocketing its propaganda to truly unbelievable heights. So these points are as follows. Human trafficking is everywhere and up 185% during COVID. The Rothschilds still control huge amounts of wealth. George Soros really does manipulate democracy. There is a real deep state. Child sacrifice happens. There may not be a clandestine group of Illuminati who meets in the crypt of Rosalind Chapel at the summer solstice, but there are more than 2,095 billionaires who are battling to control the economic fates of billions of people around the world. A little bit of truth seems to be all the serum that's necessary to inject a huge amount of falsehood into the human brain without high rejection rates. Maintain mystery. We still don't know the identity of Q, the supported founder and inside leaker of all the truths, but to come to an approximation of who they might be, and it's almost certainly not a single individual, we have to look at who possibly profits from such high amounts of chaos in American political life. This turns many eyes eastward. It's entirely possible that a brilliant, creative Russian or Chinese psych student with an intimate understanding of the American psyche concocted the whole scheme, ran it up the flagpole to certain central leadership, and received the war chest of funding to play disruptor with the U.S. already sham democracy. But Q could have just as easily been created by a group of hackers on message boards for cosplay purposes. It really doesn't matter. Humans simply love a good mystery. There's a reason why Agatha Christie sold 2 billion books. It's fun. So they're kind of going towards the Russiagate, but again, they don't really know what the source could have been. So I'm not gonna go through the whole list. It's got like a whole 12 points, but I'll go to the conclusion. In conclusion, QAnon isn't a playbook that marketers, companies, politicians, or real leaders should follow. It's a cautionary tale. We haven't seen the end of it yet, but we can be certain it will end badly. But there are certainly lessons to be learned from marketers, entrepreneurs, startups, community leaders, and anyone who wants to leave a better world behind. And the following points. In your marketing messaging, tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Create products and services that cultivate community and friendship. Help people discover a real meaning, purpose, and vision for life. Make people feel like insiders. Appeal to our highest nature. Give power to the powerless. Give a voice to the voiceless. Meet real needs. Go big. So, that's essentially how they're illustrating QAnon. And again, yeah, it's really a marketing scheme to sell merch and get people in this mindset, this conspiracy mindset. But it's telling, really telling that such a conspiracy has had an effect on our society. I mean, like where else? Look, I was talking to one of my friends, or I should say coworker, explaining to her not necessarily what QAnon is, but just this whole culture war that we're in, and especially Trump supporters. And I don't necessarily like to talk politics at work, but her and I seem to be on the same page, at least ideologically. And I'm just like, how are we going to explain QAnon to our kids? And I'm just like, or just a whole series of events. Like, yeah, there was a group of people who believed that there were cannibal billionaires from alternate dimensions, lizard people, and meanwhile, there's some serious, like, actual conspiracies. So, like, QAnon, it's fascinating. So it's a conspiracy about a elitist cabal, when there actually is an elitist cabal ruling the planet, but just not, child-eating interdimensional beings. So, yeah. But again, it's really... I think it's also just because the boomer generation just is easily susceptible, and they're just finding all these different... they're cozy, they could talk about snowflakes, but really they are. So their cozy suburban life is, slowly fracturing, because, a lot of these people, the MAGA people, they just want to go back to the 50s, nuclear family, tradcon, right, household. So that's really what they're all about. But yeah, this QAnon, the effects, and we're still living in the ripples of it. I mean, this attack in general, and just like the article said, we don't know how this is going to end. Like, we have a long way to go still. But at the very least now, with Biden in power, yeah, we'll just have to see. But I didn't really see the inauguration. I was I was working. Didn't really feel the need to watch it because I'm not really too optimistic about this administration. And we can talk further about things that they're already backpedaling on. But yeah, it's fascinating how these conservatives were they were downplaying the attack, downplaying, the insurrection, and then they're turning around and saying, look at DC, it's like we're occupied or something. Like this is you call this a peaceful transition? Like y'all just didn't just try to overthrow the government. Like, I swear to God, if that mob had actually succeeded, what would these people be saying? I'm really curious. Like, they would probably just be like, well, we got it, we won, so like, wow, man. They really revealed themselves. This is a really a mask-off moment. Anyway, so they're complaining about the occupation. There was 25,000 National Guard troops in the Capitol, and, other FBI, federal agencies. I mean, like, the city was, like, seriously locked down. And, events have shown why that needs to be the case. But it's that sort of thing that kind of made me a little more optimistic, at least for the military, because it certainly showed that they do respect at least the process of our democracy. So, again, the military, they respect the Constitution, or I hope they do. But we can have a whole conversation about military actions. But, yeah. It was just interesting to see this inauguration, or at least on Twitter, the liberals just, celebrating, like, it's over. I just love everybody, like, such in a good mood. Like, it's done. It's finally over. Like the end of Lord of the Rings, Frodo. Man. And I'm just like, the work just started. It's like, we're just getting started. Like, we have so much work to do. And, We had that Georgia election, the Senate election, so Democrats now have all three seats of power. They don't exactly have, it's a slim, majority, really, but they're, calling for the resignation of Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, Boebert, as we saw, all these different Republican congressmen and women, congresspeople, and how far could they go with that, and launching like ethics complaints or trying to get them removed from power? I mean, because the case can seriously be made that they aided and abetted that the attack and insurrection. So, yeah, who knows? They're never going to relinquish their power. They're not going to resign willfully. So you would have to go through a process of impeachment to get them out. And then people can say, well, now you're trying to overthrow. Yeah. So, anyway, we can continue. I don't want to stay too long on this because there's so much that we can talk about domestically. I at the very least wanted to talk about another thing that has caught my eye. And so this relates to the Hunter Biden scandal that we had mentioned earlier. Many different sources had mentioned. And so when this had came out, I was still trying to talk about it because, seeing that how quick these tech censorship, big tech companies and how they censored the story, it was very curious to me. And of course, there's different details that I've learned now about it. Considering the attorney that was fired in Ukraine, turns out he was pretty corrupt. So, there's more to it because a lot of these, especially this representative, and I'm reading this from Business Insider. So the headline is saying Congresswoman and QAnon supporter Marjorie Taylor Greene announces articles of impeachment against Biden. And so, it's in line with the whole Hunter Biden scandal. And that's where really this is stemming from. But she did this one day after he was inaugurated. So this is crazy. But my point being is that they point to the art or the video of Joe Biden bragging and talking pretty heavy-handedly, but really there is much deeper. So it was something that I was needing to research. I was talking about it, and again, you're going to hear more about this, especially from Fox News. They're going to start digging this story up. I mean, this is now their strategy to try to be like, no, you. So, reading from Business Insider. One day after President Joe Biden was inaugurated, Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene announced that she was introducing articles of impeachment against him. The Georgia lawmaker made waves even before she joined Congress, given her support for the far-right QAnon conspiracy theory, her claim that the school shooting in Parkland, Florida was a hoax, and her long history of racist and anti-Semitic beliefs. In a statement released Thursday, Greene, who represents Georgia's 14th congressional district, said President Joe Biden is unfit to hold the office of the presidency. His pattern of abuse of power as President Obama's vice president is lengthy and disturbing. Greene then went on to claim that Biden had committed a quid pro quo with Ukrainian officials while he was vice president to help his son siphon cash from America's greatest enemies, Russia and China. Republicans have repeatedly accused Biden of inappropriately leveraging his role as vice president to boost his son Hunter's business interest. A GOP-led Senate committee, however, conducted a months-long investigation into the matter and found no support for the claim. Multiple witnesses who testified in President Donald Trump's first impeachment also said the allegations had no merit. Hunter Biden is still under criminal investigation over his financial affairs, but there's no evidence that the president is subject of interest to the federal prosecutors. Greene said Biden should be impeached for enabling bribery and other high crimes and misdemeanors by allowing his son to influence domestic policies of a foreign nation and accept various benefits, including financial compensation from foreign nationals in exchange for certain favors. So, as they're saying, they're still investigating Hunter Biden, but the prosecutors don't seem don't see that Joe Biden had much of a role in that, or at least not yet. There is certainly a case to be made, now that the president's son is being investigated federally about interference, conflicts of interest there. But I feel like this impeachment attempt is kind of like a Hail Mary. But then what's the alternative? Because then they're going to impeach him, and their logical conclusion is they want him to step down, and they're going to get Kamala Harris. But what are they going to impeach her for? Or how is this going to end for them? I really don't know. Because these Republicans, as we already saw, they're willing to aid an insurrection. So who knows what else they have up their sleeve. Anyway, but it again. And I find it funny. So her picture that they have for this headline, she's in Congress. She has a Trump mask on, but it's already at her chin. She's one of the chin strap maskers. So I can't with these people. But how are we going to live with these people? And, I don't like the idea of purges or re-education. But at the same time, how are we going to live with these people? I don't know. Because it's a genuine cult mental illness. I don't know. I really don't know. Wow, man. Anyway, I don't want to get too strung up on this. This is why I waited, just to process things, and now I have so much to say, and I'm kind of fumbling on my words. But again, I make these predictions about the climate that we're in, and I never want to be correct about them. I really don't. But then you see stuff like this where it's are we really going down this route? Has humanity really not? Have we seriously devolved like this? So we're going to fall right back into the same cycle. Again, humanity has no sense of history. At least, when you keep them uneducated for a long enough time, they fall right back to tribal mentalities. But, I've also been looking about, or at least looking into theories about population and, Malthusian, right? And seeing those cycles of events and how wars are effectively just an effect of, population constraints and resources. I mean, obviously, but it's just interesting to see how we're in a position where we've had a population boom for so long, and now we're in a position where certain portions of the population are more advantaged than others. And so now those constraints are at a breaking point. There really are. Those strains, we talk about stimulus checks, and people, they don't want to send the stimulus checks out. Or, you saw in Georgia where the $2K was promised for voting for Democrats, and now they're trying to make it $1,400. And the eviction protections, which I had said earlier, were in December 31st. They're now for January 31st. We have, as of this recording, 9 days until rent being due, and they are not going to get a stimulus check out by that time. What's going to happen then? I really don't know. But anyway, as I was saying, so we're in a position where population, because they say overpopulation doesn't exist, but, in a sense that is true. But when you have a system where resources aren't evenly distributed out to the population, then you see situations like this where we're almost, witnessing the collapse of a society, of an empire. So, I bring this up. I talk about population because there's this article from Live Science, and it's explaining that the life expectancy in the United States has dropped dramatically due to COVID-19. Now, before COVID-19, it was already faltering because we were seeing deaths of despair, suicides, overdoses, the COVID opioid, or I should say, the opioid epidemic, not the COVID epidemic, but the COVID epidemic has certainly factored into this. And so this is, they're saying it's the largest drop of life. It's the largest drop in life expectancy in at least 40 years. This is this is unprecedented. And the United States, as I said before, has been continuously growing. And now we're at a tipping point, at least for our population under this capitalist system. And yeah, I truly believe that when they do the census in 2030, the population would have either plateaued or declined for the first time in history. That's just my prediction. I'm not educated in that sense, unless immigration, with this new administration, immigration becomes easier. Because the fertility rate, the birth rate in this country has been faltering for some time, and that has to do with socioeconomic factors. But if we allow for more immigration, at least we can replace the population loss due to a faltering birth rate. Anyway, I'm not a demographic person, but that's just what I'm hypothesizing. But I'm just going to read from the article from Life Science. So, U.S. life expectancy just dropped by more than a year, the largest decline in decades, as a result of the sheer number of deaths from COVID-19, according to the estimates from a new study. The study researchers project that due to COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic, the average U.S. life expectancy in 2020 will drop by 1.13 years, bringing it to 77.48 years, according to the study, published Thursday, January 14th, in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. That's the largest single-year decline in life expectancy in at least 40 years, and it would bring the country's life expectancy down to its lowest since 2003, the researchers found. Life expectancy in the U.S. rarely declines, and when it does, it makes headlines. Most recently, life expectancy declined by 0.1 years in 2015, 16, and 17, a trend that was attributed to to rises in deaths of despair, including drug overdoses and suicides. The new estimated decline due to COVID-19 is 10 times greater. And I think this is going to get worse. I really do. What's more, the study showed even larger declines in 2020 among Black and Latino communities, which have been hit particularly hard by the pandemic. Overall, nearly 400,000 deaths have been attributed to COVID-19 in the U.S., according to the Johns Hopkins Virus Dashboard. The study projected life expectancy for Black people will drop by 2.1 years to 72.78 years. That's crazy. The life expectancy for Latino population will drop by 3.5 years, or 3.05 years, to 78.77. In contrast, the life expectancy for white people is projected to decline by 0.68 years to 77.84 years. I wonder what that is. So as we saw, because resources and our justice system, other socioeconomic factors are not equally represented among the races in this country. We see that different groups have different life expectancies, and of course the COVID pandemic had affected different groups worse. So Black people were affected worse by the pandemic, and their life expectancy has dropped considerably. It's like they say systemic racism isn't real, and for some time I was kind of thinking that, but you see all these factors for Black people being behind, and it's just like, this is undeniable. Of course, in some ways, life for a Black person is far better than it was in 1900, but it's not by a much. It's not by a lot, if we're being honest. So anyway, continuing, our study analyzes the effect of this exceptional number of deaths on life expectancy for the entire nation, as well as the consequences for marginalized groups. Study co-author Teresa Andrasfe, a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Southern California, said in a statement, the COVID-19 pandemic's disproportionate effects on the life expectancy of Black and Latino Americans likely has to do with greater exposure through their workplace or extended family contacts, in addition to receiving poorer health care, leading to more infections and worse outcomes. Yeah, and as a personal anecdote, speaking as Hispanic, Latino, by the way, I never really understand, I need to research more on what the distinction is, Hispanic or Latino. But speaking on that, with the family dynamic, I'm trying to stay isolated. I mean, even now, close family and friends are still getting sick, and it's and these are people who post online how often they go out. I'm like, this is not a shock. Of course, now they're healthy and they're doing fine, but still, I don't want to get sick. So of course I'm going to isolate myself and, why don't you come around? Because there's a pandemic. I really, when they ask when can I come down, I don't know. Maybe Easter, which is 3 months from now. But regardless, they have a lengthy talk. This article is pretty lengthy about just different factors, about the communities. But on another note, when they talk about 400,000 deaths, that is forever going to be the legacy of the Trump administration. And I really don't know how anybody's still going to defend him after this. And, you see, he could have done things. 400,000 dead Americans, 400,000 people. And this is certainly going to get worse unless they can get this vaccine distribution underway. And it's been recently released also that they just did not have a plan. Now, I was kind of when I was initially talking about the distribution, I was kind of ragging on Democrats a bit. I don't know why. I'm just I have no faith in any institution. But yeah, I mean, they had no plan. They didn't care. This is insane. And yeah, man, I just, in my world, right, if you don't have any empathy, in my view, you're truly subhuman. I don't see you as a human being if you have no empathy. I think you're broken and sad, but at the same time, it's just if empathy isn't something that is at the forefront of your mind, then you're no better than any other creature that's just, living off instinct, really. That's in my mind where you're at. And still, there are plenty of animals that show empathy and at least some sort of, caring for others. So it's really it really shows human nature and our ability to just completely devalue human life. And it's not even from monetary gain. It's just more I want to make the next guy, I want to make his job as hard as possible because spite. And anyway, 400,000 dead. But as I said, this could be the start of a die-off that really hasn't been seen before. Really. I mean, I could predict many different situations, but there could be another pandemic. There could be a serious economic collapse. There's so many different factors. So we'll have to explore it in future episodes because, the population dynamics, not just in this country, but just, it's really interesting now. And it's something that I would like to research more. So there's that. So there's the population, or at least the life expectancy that was projected to decline. And then we have the jobless claims that continue to rise. And so this article came out January 14th. Another 965,000 Americans filed new unemployment checks last week. New weekly unemployment claims spiked for far more than expected last week to reach a 5-month high, as the coronavirus pandemic and stay-in-place orders weighed heavily on the labor market. The U.S. Department of Labor released its weekly report on new jobless claims Thursday morning at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Here were the main results in the report compared to the consensus estimates compiled by Bloomberg. Initial jobs claims week end January 9th, 965,000 versus 789,000 expected, and a revised 784. During the prior week, continuing claims week end ended January 2nd. 5.271 million versus 5 million expected, and 5.072 million during the prior week. At 965,000, new jobless claims hit the highest level since August, ending what had been a tentative start of a downward trend in initial claims. The rise and level of new unemployment claims is shocking, Mark Hamrick, Bankrate's senior economic analyst, said in an email Thursday. This reminds us that the economic crisis has not gone away, far from it, at a time when multiple crises have been vying for our attention. Heading into Thursday's report, new initial unemployment claims were expected to dip below 800,000 for a third straight week. Initial jobless claims have stayed below 1 million mark in every week since late August, after peaking at a record nearly 7 million in March. To put this into context, the worst reading during the global financial crisis was 665K, so the ongoing stress in the job market is clear for all to see. After a fall in employment in December, we need to be braced for another decline in jobs in January. James Knightley, ING chief international economist, said in a note Thursday, there will be no real improvement in the jobs market until COVID containment measures are relaxed and businesses have the confidence to hire. By state, Illinois and Florida saw by far the greatest increase in unadjusted new jobless claims last week, with both states' new claims increasing more by 50,000, but the majority of U.S. states also posted increase in new claims, in a testament to the broad-based negative impacts the pandemic was still exerting to employment across the country. And so, they have this whole chart here. I'm reading this from Yahoo Finance. And so they show the jobless claims amid the pandemic. And basically in March, it just spiked. I mean, it was just crazy. So they have two different lines. So one for seasonally adjusted and not seasonally adjusted. And the seasonally adjusted was peak at 6,867,000, and the not seasonally adjusted was peaked at 6,211,406. And this is in April, March. I mean, things were pretty bad, like crazy bad. And then we'll look at June, May and June period. So is that like 1,900. 2 million, actually 1 million, 1.9 million, 2 million. Yeah, so I mean, it's slowly leveling out, but now we're seeing a dip upwards in January and February. Anyway. Yeah, so we'll have to see how this continues with these jobless claims, which is another case why we probably need stimulus checks, because people are unemployed. So if you give them some money, they can buy what they need. That's the thing that I don't really understand about. Again, they keep saying that people are going to save it, they're not going to spend it. People are going to spend it. People are going to spend it. That's why I wish I was just getting paid better, because now when I spend, I see it as like a civic duty, trying to keep whatever's left of this economy alive. But it's not viable. Like, we need a minimum wage increase. And another factor that people forget also is if we cancel student loan debt, people have more, like, they don't have to pay for that anymore. In fact, that debt can be paid off with taxing Wall Street, right? I mean, how much right, was a transaction tax, right? Like how many transactions are made over the course of a day, weeks, months? Like, do you think that's not going to be paid off like within? Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways to figure this out. Like, it's obviously a system meant to keep people in indentured servitude. And again, I can't get into conversations with boomer people because it's always, if it doesn't revolve around, socialism, this and that, then it revolves around, well, I had to pay my student debt, so why is it that you get to have a free pass? It's just like, you don't get it. And this is why, I just don't, this is why I can't really continue with it. So anyway, the jobless claims there. Continuing onward. So that's really how, all that I really wanted to discuss, at least with the domestic sphere. And I know I said a lot there, but I wanted to continue onward because collapse is not just the United States, although it's a pretty dramatic and pretty reality show-esque, right? So we can talk about the international sphere and just around the world where collapse is taking place. And so I wanted to talk at least food, and collapse in terms of food, and the World Food Program. The director, he's saying that we are expected to have a disaster or catastrophe. So I'm reading this from Time magazine. World Food Program Executive Director David Beasley was in the Niger capital, Niamey, in the Sahel, a vast sweep of semi-arid land that separates the Sahara from the savannah, when he got the call from the Nobel Committee telling him the UN agency had won the 2020 Peace Prize. Al-Qaeda cells operated to the north, ISIS to the south, and in the territory between the WFP was working to rehabilitate thousands of hectares of farmland. One of the program's aims was to prevent food insecure locals from falling prey to jihadist groups who choke supply corridors and use hunger as a recruitment tool. It was not a situation in which the former Republican governor had expected to find himself after he left U.S. politics in 2004 and set up a nonprofit. When the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, nominated Beasley for the organization's directorship in February 2017, he said, "No way, I'm not going to work for the UN," he told Time from his home in South Carolina last month, where he was spending the Thanksgiving holiday. 3.5 years later, it's been the greatest job of my life, I have no doubt about that. Humans have made incredible progress towards poverty eradication over the past 2 centuries, according to oft-cited, if controversial, chart compiled by the Bill Gates Foundation, funded Our World in Data. Some 94% of the world's population endured extreme poverty 200 years ago. By 2015, that designation applied to just about 10% of the world's people, according to One World in Data, although development experts have contested its metrics and definition of poverty. In recent years, however, the world has veered off the track from the UN's goals of achieving zero hunger by 2030. In fact, almost 690 million people were undernourished in 2019, up by nearly 60 million from 2014, according to the World Health Organization. The slide does not augur well for a world set to see a population increase of 2 billion by 2050 and projected to experience more frequent and more devastating extreme weather events driven by climate change. For the first time in a long time, Beasley says, we're going backward. The pandemic has dramatically accelerated that trend. By June this year, the WFP was undertaking the biggest program in its history, assisting some 138 million people, up from a record 97 million in 2019. Today, Beasley says there are 270 million going hungry in the countries where the WFP operates. That demands an urgent humanitarian response. What eventually persuaded Beasley to take the WFP job, he says, was a conversation with his friend Tony Hall, a former Democratic congressman who has served as chief of the U.S. mission to the UN agencies in Rome. If there's ever God's work on earth, this is it, Beasley recalls Hall telling him. In subsequent meetings, both Democrat and Republican senators assured Beasley of their support for the WFP. No matter what transpired under the then new executive, And when Beasley eventually got in front of President Trump, he found him receptive. He got it. So fortunately, all our budget numbers went up, Beasley says. He adds that President-elect Biden has long backed the WFP's work, and he also expects to receive tremendous support from the Biden administration. On December 10th, Beasley will accept the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the WFP. In an interview ahead of his acceptance speech, edited for length and clarity, he told Time about the impact of COVID-19 on global food security, why 2021 promises to pose a far greater challenge than 2020, and what can be done to mitigate the hunger pandemic. Pretty extensive list or review there about this famine that will hit. And the WFP is pretty helpful, at least in getting these people food, doing God's work, as they're saying. But yeah, as he said, we're going backwards, and they're projecting 2 billion, and a population increase of 2 billion by 2050, and 2050 is also supposed to be the mark date for some of the more disastrous climate impacts or climate effects. So it's really, I think what would be more the case is that you would have a population increase by 2 billion, but then the life expectancy might just decrease so dramatically because of infant mortality and such. So who knows what that could be the case. I mean, yeah, it's pretty interesting to see how things could unfold, but they're showing that we're desperately going to need food programs for underfed people, and we have so much food waste in this country. It's unbelievable. I mean, we produce in excess and then waste so much, and then we have people like Jeff Bezos who could end all of this. Really could do something about this. So continuing, I wanted to talk about this story out of Egypt, and it really goes to show that even though we have our horror stories here in the United States, other places in the world are still affected by this pandemic. And there's a terrible story, and there's a video, but I don't want to watch it. It's and I'm reading this from Memo, the Middle East Monitor, and it's a story out of Egypt that shows an entire ICU ward dying because their oxygen supply is just cut off. And I haven't seen the video. I've just heard a description of a nurse basically just curled up in the corner, and other people just filming it because there's nothing they can do. These people are just choking to death. Yeah, it's pretty intense stuff. And it's actually interesting how, I can't watch something like this, but I don't flinch at watching, combat footage, some really raw stuff. But, something like this, I can't watch, really. So anyway, reading from the article, quote, all coronavirus patients in an intensive care unit in Egypt have died after the oxygen supply to the ward failed. Footage captured by one of the patient's relatives taken at El Husseiniya Central Hospital in Sharqiya province has gone viral online. The cameraman's aunt, Fatima Al-Sayed Mohammed Ibrahim, 66, was among the patients being treated at the quarantine center. The incident happened after the oxygen level was almost below 2%, and there was neither enough pressure nor enough oxygen to save the patient's lives. It is the second such incident. Such incident to occur after patients in the ICU at Zefta General Hospital suffered the same fate. The tragedy has underscored the corruption and negligence at the heart of Egypt's ruling government. Egypt's health minister Hala Zayed claimed that the patients didn't die due to a lack of oxygen and accused the Muslim Brotherhood of spreading rumors. The director of the hospital, Dr. Muhammad Sami Al-Najjar, spoke in another video claiming that the situation was normal. He denied that there was a lack of oxygen. He said the patients had died from natural causes, from old age and chronic diseases. Yeah, just all died at once. Wow. The governor of Sharkia, the governor of Sharkia, Dr. Mamdal Gorab, said 4 patients rather than the whole ward died. There are unconfirmed reports on Facebook that the man who filmed the scene had been arrested after Gorab asked security forces to arrest those responsible for taping the incident. Also trending was a picture of a nurse wearing her full scrub, sitting on the phone in the corner in the unit in shock of what was happening. Reports have stated that the nurse was fined for not working during hard times. Like, what was she supposed to do? I don't want to watch it. It's too much for me. I'm sorry. It's really disturbing. But wow, man. They're just like, no, they just died of old age. I don't need to do a voice, but yeah, I just want to imagine like people just trying to downplay this. And again, if something like this had happened in the U.S. under Trump, they would have been doing the same thing, the same stuff. Wow, man. So it goes to show, it's not just us that are having such a bungled response to this pandemic and people dying. I mean, again, I feel like, the more conservative or at least right-leaning you are, the less human life matters to you. So you can kind of just like shrug off like, well, what are you going to do? People die, It's just crazy. So, continuing onward. So, in the wake of this pro-Trump attack, insurrection, coup attempt, the eyes of the world have been looking at us really intently like, what the fuck? I mean, already they were just like, guys, relax, but now they're really, really worried. And it's been interesting talking to people from outside the U.S. like, how are you coping with this? I'm just like, this is stupid. I really don't know what to do. But this is coming out of China. So China is saying that the U.S. is facing internal collapse after pro-Trump riot. And they're not wrong. Not entirely wrong. So the state-run Global Times says, and this is from Al Jazeera, the state-run Global Times says violence in U.S. Capitol is the result of society's severe division and failure to control the divide. This is from January 8th. Quote, the assault on the U.S. Capitol by supporters of President Donald Trump reflects a failure of leadership as well as the deep divide running through American society, editorials in China's state media said on Friday. Hundreds of supporters of President Trump besieged the Capitol on Wednesday in what House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi described as an insurrection against the United States. The Global Times, a tabloid run by the People's Daily, the newspaper of the ruling Communist Party, described the riots as a sign of internal collapse that could not be easily reversed. The unprecedented mob in the Capitol, a symbol of the U.S. system, is a result of the U.S. society's severe division and the country's failure to control such division, it said. As time goes by and with abuses of resources by generations of politicians, the U.S. political system has degraded, the paper said, adding that such politicians deserve chaos, violence. It also lashed out at what is described as double standards among U.S. politicians who expressed support for pro-democracy protesters who forced their way into the territory's legislative council in 2019. Quote, in Hong Kong, violent actions are described as a beautiful sight. In the U.S., people involved in this chaos are called mobs, it said. And then it's at least going to talk about the Hong Kong point, titled False Equivalence. The Hong Kong protesters amid mass rallies against a proposed extradition law with mainland China that evolved into calls for universal suffrage broke through police barricades and vandalized the legislative chamber. The Hong Kong media pushed back on the comparison between the two events, saying Hong Kong protesters were fighting for more freedom at the ballot box, while the pro-Trump supporters were staging a violent insurrection to undermine their country's free and fair elections. Hong Kong Free Press said the comparison between the turmoil in the U.S. and Hong Kong protests amounted to perverse propaganda. China has since imposed a sweeping national security law on the territory, under which more than 50 pro-democracy politicians, activists, and even academics were this week arrested. This is a tweet from Kate O'Keefe. So sick of people trying to compare the U.S. with China and Russia. As distressing as the U.S. Capitol riot is, participants will be arrested for trying to subvert democracy. The 50-plus people just arrested in Hong Kong were detained for trying to promote it. Meanwhile, the official China daily newspaper said Trump's narrow nationalism had taken a toll on the U.S. Quote, if the Biden administration can draw lessons from the darkest day in U.S. history, the pain the country experienced these days may come to be viewed as growing pains, end quote. It said, quote, the violence and chaos that have erupted in the U.S. over the past year show that what happens when a country's leaders lose touch with reality, end quote. It added, Hua Chunying, a spokeswoman for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, earlier said that Beijing hoped the American people could regain peace, stability, and safety following the chaos at the Capitol. As the violence unfolded, Global Times also published reports claiming Chinese netizens had labeled the riot karma, juxtaposing images of the events in Hong Kong, Ledco, and the U.S. Capitol. The publication quoted Chinese netizens as saying that they saw the chaos in the U.S. as revenge. This is the first political coup to happen in the American continent without the involvement of the U.S. embassies. Global Times quoted one named commentator as saying, on the Chinese social media platform Sina Weibo, a photo of a pro-Trump supporter sitting inside the office of Speaker Pelosi also went viral. Yeah, the one guy just sitting in her desk. But yeah, they're all just looking at this as like a what the fuck moment. And it's interesting that they're like trying to make it equivalency with Hong Kong with this event, as though Hong Kong is the seat of power for China. Anyway, Hong Kong is supposed to be its autonomous territory, so it's not even the same thing. But you can see that there's a clear, they're clearly looking at us as though we're falling apart. I mean, China has its own issues, and they're not exactly experiencing any internal possibilities of a civil war, but this is at least a good period or a peaceful period in China, because civil war has always been a bit of a pastime over there. So that's at least what they're looking at us with. They're looking at us and just saying they look at this and they say how this is the reason why democracy doesn't work, because you see this division and just chaos in general, because they prefer order. Anyway, so just moving onward. So we can expose also or talk about another story with Alexei Navalny. And Alexei Navalny has been recovering from a poison attack from President Putin. And he has returned to Russia after his recovery, and he has been arrested. And so this has been a defiant moment for him, and also a telling moment for our Russian opposition. There's actually a planned protest tomorrow, and they're already making preemptive arrests, so we'll see what happens in Russia. But this opposition leader, he has returned, and he's been arrested for 30 days, but there's so much to unpack here. And on his YouTube channel, he had been investigating his own assassination attempt. This is so crazy. I have to read it further, but this dude had he legitimately called the guy who poisoned him, and he got him to basically confess. I mean, this is so crazy. It's like a cartoon. So I'm reading this from NBC News. Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny's return to his homeland Sunday was, from the very start, meant to be a symbolic act of defiance. He was arrested on arrival and now sits in Moscow's most notorious detention facility, awaiting a trial that could see him jailed for years, under guard by the same regime he says tried to kill him with a Soviet-era nerve agent. When Navalny announced he would return to Russia after recovering from Novichok poisoning in a German hospital, it begged the question, why? The Kremlin had made it clear for months it did not want President Vladimir Putin's most outspoken opponent to return and was willing to play dirty to discourage it. In the days since Navalny's return, it appears he's returned for what could be his final fight. They are afraid, he said in a video recorded from a makeshift courtroom outside Moscow on Monday, where he was sentenced to a 30-day pre-trial detention. They are afraid of you, he said. They are afraid of those people who could stop staying silent and realize their own strength. I call on you to stop being silent, resist and take to the streets. There are so many of us. While Navalny left Russia in August on a German air ambulance, he clung to life in a medically induced coma. Scientists in multiple countries determined that he was poisoned and nearly killed with Novichok, a variant of Soviet-made nerve agents, the same type of chemical used against former Russian spy Sergei Skripal in the United Kingdom in 2018. To Navalny's supporters, it was immediately obvious who tried to kill him: Russia's Federal Security Service. After all, they argued, who else could get their hands on such a weapon? When Navalny, under the care of German specialists, awoke from his coma weeks later, he was unequivocal in placing blame directly on Putin. The Russian government has denied any involvement. Navalny's national campaign is organizing protests Saturday across the country in support of the jailed opposition icon. On February 2nd, he will appear in court, where a judge will consider the state's request to turn a suspended sentence into hard time served. If this happens, he faces imprisonment of up to 3.5 years under the current charges. Protests, his allies say, are his only hope. This was already a high-stakes situation by the standards of Russia's stifled, heavily controlled domestic policies, but Navalny dramatically raised the stakes Tuesday night in a move that can only be interpreted as him going all in on an epic final confrontation with Putin. His team released one of the largest investigations into Putin's wealth. In the introduction to the 2-hour video detailing his team's investigation into the financing behind Putin's palace, Navalny tells viewers that his team decided to move forward with the investigation when he was still in intensive care and immediately agreed that they would release it when he returned home to Moscow because he, quote, because we do not want the main character of this film to think we are afraid of him. The report details Putin's rise to wealth and power and the construction of a massive $1.4 billion palace on the Black Sea coast. NBC News has not independently confirmed the report's findings, though Navalny says he decided to pursue the investigation after waking from his coma. The scope of the effort and the nature of the material presented suggests that this is a culmination of years of work following a decade of smaller-scale investigations into the figures who surround Putin. Until now, Navalny has never taken such direct shots at the leader. The great Russian writer Leo Tolstoy once very clearly described the structure of power in Russia. Quote, the villains who robbed the people gathered together, recruited soldiers and judges to guard their orgy, and are feasting, he said. End quote, he said. We will only live normally when we stop tolerating officials who steal and re-electing them. In 48 hours since going on YouTube, it has been viewed 38 million times and was the #1 trending video in Russia. Yet the question remains, is it enough to inspire a large-scale show of support February 2nd when he goes to trial? If not, and even with the prospect of possible international sanctions over the issue, the Kremlin may see the cost of jailing Navalny as entirely affordable. So this is a serious moment in Russia. Serious, pro-democracy, anti-corruption movement. And this is like the climax of Navalny's career, anti-authoritarian organizing activism, and also his investigation into this. They call it a palace, but really it's just like his own private kingdom for Putin. I mean, this guy is a czar for real. And yeah, I mean, Russia is just just a cabal of oligarchs and, the mafia, the Russian mafia. So we can really, examine this, but I wanted to at least talk about it because we're going to see some action, at least in protests with this, and they're saying February 2nd, there's going to be the trial. So, yeah, this is a serious turn of events, at least for Russia. And, we talk about like doing sanctions and actions against Russia, and it's not necessarily that I want increased tensions with a superpower. Well, they're not even a superpower, but still, it doesn't. There's no real rhyme or reason to have increased tensions. But on an issue like this, it certainly does pay to bring it to attention and certainly call out Putin for his corruption. Because you can say Russiagate, this and that Putin owned Trump, but this is certainly something that can, in terms of criticism, that you can definitely launch at him. So that's what I wanted to at least highlight for, just for now. But we'll have to see how this unfolds. And of course, I need to see more of Navalny's YouTube channel and the videos that he's released there. But it's also encouraging to see how there is a growing movement in Russia to at least bring democracy, right? And not in, and they can talk about like, oh, well, this is a CIA op. I mean, I don't think this is. I think this is a true like homegrown anti-corruption movement. So we'll have to see how that continues. So continuing on, I wanted to also speak on a story on the cartel activity in Mexico. And as we see in Mexico, it's in the midst of a drug war. I mean, there's a whole subreddit that I watch or follow called Narco Footage, and they basically explain all the different like politics and history of the narco wars. But it's fascinating that in Mexico there are actually like towns and villages where the government has no control, and it's just the people arming themselves and protecting themselves. So I wanted to at least talk about, and I'm reading this from Mexico News Daily. They're showing women in Michoacan taking up arms to protect their homes from the CJNG. And the CJNG are said to be, it's like what, El Mencho is in charge of that one? Like pretty hardcore guys. So, quote, a group of women in Michoacan has taken up arms to protect their small town from the Jalisco New Generation Council, Mexico's most powerful and violent criminal organization. The Associated Press reported that an all-women self-defense group has emerged in El Terrero, a village in the Tierra Caliente region of Michoacan. The women took assault rifles and set up roadblocks to defend the village from what they describe as the CJNG's bloody incursion into the state. Some of the almost 50 female vigilantes are pregnant, and some take their small children with them as they patrol El Terrero. They told AP they fear CJNG gunmen could enter the town at any time via the rural area's dirt paths or dirt roads. Many of the vigilantes have lost family members to the violence that has long plagued the Tierra Caliente. Eufresina Blanco Nava said her 29-year-old son, a lime picker, was abducted by presumed cartel members and never seen again. They have disappeared a lot of people and young girls too, she said. Another woman who asked not to be identified because she has relatives in CJNG strongholds told AP that the Jalisco cartel kidnapped and presumably killed her 14-year-old daughter. We are going to defend those we have left, the children we have left, with our lives, she said. We women are tired of seeing our children and our families disappear. They take our sons, they take our daughters, our relatives, our husbands. One reason why an all-women self-defense group has emerged in El Terrero is because men are growing scarce in the lime-growing Tierra Caliente region, AP said. As soon as they see a man who can carry a gun, they take him away, said an unidentified vigilante. They disappear. We don't know if they have them as recruits or if they already killed them. The group doesn't only use assault weapons and roadblocks to defend their homes. They have a homemade tank, a large pickup truck reinforced with steel plate armor. These girls are serious. Holy shit. Or these women. El Terrero has long been dominated by the Nuevo Familia Michoacana cartel and the Los Viagras gang, AP said, but the CJNG control nearby areas and is determined to increase its area of influence. Naranjo de Chila, a town just across the Grande River from El Terrero, is the birthplace of CJNG leader Nemesio El Mencho Oseguera Cervantes, Mexico's most wanted drug lord. The women vigilantes have been accused by some people by being foot soldiers of the Nueva Familia or Los Viagas, but they deny the allegations, although AP said that they clearly see the Jalisco cartel as their foe. They told the news agency that they would be very happy if the police and army came to El Terrero and took over the job that they are currently doing. One person who doubts that the women vigilantes are bona fide self-defense force members is Hipólito Mora, founder of a self-defense force in the nearby town of La Ruana that took up arms against the Caballeros Templarios, the Knights Templars cartel, in 2013. Again, almost assured that they are not legitimate self-defense activists, said Mora, who 3 weeks ago announced his intentions to run for governor of Michoacán at the election in June. They are organized crime. They are organized crime. The few self-defense groups that exist have allowed themselves to be infiltrated. There are criminals disguised as self-defense. However, Mora acknowledged that the same conditions that force him to take up arms remain. The authorities and police still don't guarantee security, he said. AP noted that Governor Silvano Aureoles also rejects the legitimacy of the self-defense groups in the state. They are criminals, period. Now, to cloak themselves and protect their illegal activities, they call themselves self-defense groups as if that were some passport for impunity, he said. So I'm curious to see how things will unfold, because a lot of the cases with the self-defense groups, they just, as they're saying, it's a cartel of its own. But, as the women are saying, men are growing scarce, so now they feel like they have to take up arms. So, again, this is happening in a state or a country where the Second Amendment isn't a guarantee. So we live in a country where, stuff like this should be more formalized, at least. People can definitely form militias whenever they please. It's interesting to see this happen. And again, when I talk about like a collapse scenario, the cartels, gang activities, that's certainly something to worry about, because they already have like an organized structure. And in a situation where there's no rule of law, then they become the enforcement, because they already have their system in place, already have networks of command and money, money structure. So yeah, there's something that I wanted to at least highlight there with the cartels. So, wrapping up with the international field, I wanted to speak on, at least with the natural segment, and open up with a piece from The Independent about indigenous tribes in the United States, and also the correlation of fossil fuels such as fracking and how that's affecting their health. So, quote, "As a member of the Ponca Nation, my family's journey from our homelands to what would become Oklahoma took place in 1877. My grandfather was 8 years old when he was walked at the point of a bayonet from South Dakota with his parents and grandparents. Hundreds of tribes were forced to walk along many trails of tears nationwide. Millions did not survive the journey, but the devastation of spirit and culture remains part of our genetic memory. So too does our ancestral knowledge of living in balance with the earth and philosophy for caring for the next 7 generations to come." Fast forward to today, the land back movement is gaining mainstream recognition, and racist statues and sports teams' names are disappearing. Amid this progress, however, the Trump administration, state governments, and the fossil fuel industries are attempting the largest indigenous land grab since the 1830 Indian Removal Act. On top of this, the climate clock is running out as Americans continue to reel under the continuing saga of the election and the rising deaths from COVID-19. Under the cover of pandemic and anxious for a last gasp, the fossil fuel industry is striking deals for control of indigenous lands with the outgoing Trump administration and his GOP allies in Congress, from the Arctic refuge to the bayou. It is nothing new to the native peoples that so much oil and gas activities are placed on or near tribal land, contaminating soil, rivers, aquifers, and air, while adding to the climate crisis and directly impacting community health. We are considered sacrifice communities. Oklahoma has become a fossil fuel dependent state. Today it is home of the largest convergence of aging oil and gas pipelines and thousands of man-made earthquakes owing to fracking. In my small Ponca tribe, we hold a funeral nearly every week from a fossil fuel related illness. All our families have multiple cases of asthma, cardiovascular disease, and industry-specific cancers. Our wells are so polluted our tribe must now buy water. Our land is so toxic organic food can't be grown within 16 miles. They call it economic progress. We call it environmental genocide. In July 2020, it seemed change was in the wind. In a landmark decision, the Supreme Court reaffirmed that much of eastern Oklahoma falls within Indian reservations, known as the McGirt decision. It held far-reaching implications, including reaffirming tribal sovereignty over environmental lawmaking, but the undoing of such a victory has engineered 15 years ago. Within days of the Supreme Court ruling, in consultation with the Petroleum Alliance of Oklahoma, Governor Kevin Stitt pulled the pin on a long-hidden environmental grenade. In 2005, Senator Inhofe, Republican, quietly attached a midnight rider to an unrelated federal highway bill that gives the state and the EPA environmental authority over tribal lands. In August, the COVID pandemic had shattered most tribal offices statewide. At this time, tribal governments were informed by mail that we had a few days to comment on the EPA takeover. Shortly thereafter, in violation of our right to free, prior, and informed consent, Trump's EPA administrator, Andrew Wheeler, reported that tribes had been consulted, a far cry from consent, and just like that, the deal was done. But Governor Stitt seeks much more. Revealed in the memo to Congress called One Oklahoma, Stitt is working to strip the 39 federally recognized tribes of our inherent sovereignty. This plan paves the way for further oil and gas development. It is co-signed by a number of Trump allies, notably the godfather of fracking, multi-billionaire Howard Hamm of Continental Resources, one of the nation's biggest independent oil companies. But more than that, it threatens to erase our treaty rights, our heritage and culture. It is the blueprint for how to dismantle the rights of Native peoples across the country. The fight for indigenous rights has never been more important for all humanity. It is no coincidence that more than 80% of the world's remaining intact forests and biodiversity is in indigenous hands. We are global leaders of green movements, including the right of nature, which provides legal standing for ecosystems and law. My own tribe, with the help of groups like Movement Rights, was the first in the U.S. to recognize that on tribal land, nature, of which humans are a part, has a legal right to exist and regenerates its vital cycles. In 2016, Mini Wiconi, or Water is Life, entered the American lexicon as hundreds of thousands joined Native peoples on the Standing Rock Reservation. We came to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline from going under the Missouri River to protect the sacred water on behalf of 6 tribes and 17 million Americans downstream. Many of us faced down police water cannons and freezing temperatures. We were maced, arrested, numbered with Sharpie pens on our arms, and held in dog cages. My number was 138. My son's number was 4,838. Following Standing Rock, many states passed laws making protesting fossil fuels activities felonies, including Oklahoma. We will always put our bodies on the line to protect the source of all life, Earth, and future generations, including yours. The solution for a green future based on living in balance with the Earth already exists, and indigenous peoples hold ancestral knowledge integral to that shift. We will fight One Oklahoma in court, in Congress, signing petitions, and on the front lines. we will need you to join us. After all, we are not humans protecting nature. We are nature protecting itself. So that was a bit of a read, but yeah, that was very much poignant. This is from Cassie Camp Horinek. And as they're saying, the effects of fracking and just fossil fuel activity has poisoned their land. They have to buy their water now. It's killing them with diseases. I mean, it goes to show that manifest destiny is still very much real here in the United States. I mentioned manifest destiny in places like Brazil, or I should say the Amazon in Brazil, but it's still very much alive here. And as we're seeing, they're still trying to assert dominance on these reservations so that they can tap whatever resources are left, because we're starting to dry up the fossil fuels and the lumber, whatever. Again, this is all stolen land, this whole country. But I'm curious as to if they continue to pressure reservations and the type of resistance that we're going to see from Native Americans, how that's going to be reflected. Because when I was watching this DAPL, Dakota Access Pipeline, I was thinking to moments like the Ghost Dance or the Plains Wars. I mean, this is still, the dynamic of imperialism is still alive. It's still here. It never went away. And it's shocking to me that stuff like this, and people were shocked about the Black Lives Matters, but when I was seeing this happen, it clicked for me, this is what the state will do if you get in its way. They will crush you, even if it's for water, clean water, because corporations want an extra buck and they need that pipeline. You see a lot of people, that whenever you say we need to step away from fossil fuels, well, the jobs, and it's not just the emissions, it's the contamination of water supply, and they don't see it, man. It's really, people are living in another world, really. But I wanted to talk about that at least, because in terms of green movements and environmental activism, indigenous activity or influence is going to be vital towards the success of any type of environmental movement. So that's what I wanted to at least talk there. So on speaking with preserving nature, and they're saying that they're already seeing the effects of industrialized, or I should say the climate effects or the fossil fuel contamination. So there's another research that's showing that Earth ecosystems could be collapsing one by one in the next decade. So, we saw in moments like the Australia wildfires, I mean, that was a catastrophic event, but it's going to accelerate. So by 2030, we could be living in an entirely different situation, speaking on our ecosystem. So I'm reading this from oceanfacts.net. According to a new major study, global warming will cause cliff-like catastrophic biodiversity loss globally if some greenhouse gas emissions are not reduced, and some ecosystems on the planet may collapse by 2030. In other words, the Earth's ecosystems may collapse one by one in the next 10 years, and the tropical ocean will bear the brunt. Researchers in the United Kingdom, the United States, and South Africa have analyzed climate data from more than 150 years by dividing the Earth into 100 square kilometers and cross-referencing biological information of more than 30,000 species of birds, mammals, reptiles, and fish. The results showed that when under the RCP 8.5 model, no reduction in carbon emissions, 73% of the world's species will be hit by an unprecedented climate crisis, and humans will also face potential disasters. Alex Piggott of the Center for Biodiversity and Environment at University College London said that this model shows that once the global temperatures crosses the horizon threshold, most animal populations will be exposed to high heat, and they cannot adapt to the environment through their own evolution. There is only one final outcome: extinction. Scientists warns that this is not a slow decline, but that this is the edge of a series of cliffs, and all species on the planet will experience the collapse of the population at different times. Based on the influence of seasons, geographic location, and other factors, scientists predict that the average temperature of the Earth will rise by 4 degrees Celsius by 2100. Based on the influence of seasons, geographic location, and other factors, scientists predict that the average temperature of the Earth will rise by 4 degrees Celsius by 2100 at the current level of carbon emissions. The data shows that when global warming reaches 4 degrees Celsius, 15% of the organisms will be strongly unsuitable, which may cause irreversible damage to the regional ecosystem. But when the temperature increase is controlled to 2 degrees Celsius, the upper limit set by the Paris Climate Agreement, this figure drops by 2%. Researchers predict that this unprecedented temperature crisis will begin to manifest in the tropical oceans by 2030. In recent years, large-scale bleaching incidences in the Pacific, such as the Great Barrier Reef, have shown that this has happened in some places. By 2050, similar disasters will occur in high latitudes. Coral reefs only occupy a very small part of the ocean, but they support a quarter of the creatures in the entire ocean. Scientists believe that with global warming reaching 2 degrees Celsius, the risk of loss of Earth's cliff-like biodiversity is rising sharply. Since the Industrial Revolution, the Earth has warmed up by more than 1 degree Celsius, and the greenhouse gas emissions caused by the burning of fossil fuels are breaking new highs every year. The United Nations has called for humanity to reduce its emissions by 7.6% annually by 2030 to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So, as I've said before, we're in the midst of mass extinction, and temperature increases are certainly going to affect how life reacts to this. I mean, certainly the megafauna is going to die out, if not by our own activity, hunting them, but just from the heat. And just also another factor that's lost is the clean, fresh water that's available. So, it's going to be fascinating. It would be runaway greenhouse effects, runaway warming effects. They're saying 4 degrees Celsius. And the interesting thing about these articles is that when they release a figure like that, that's supposed to be a bit shocking, it's still the lowest estimate. We're seriously in the worst case scenario. I've seen some figures that put it at 8 degrees Celsius. So it's really insane how by 2030 already we're going to be in an entirely different world. So this is going to be they say the roaring 20s. I mean, this is going to be seriously the last decade, any semblance of normalcy before people really start to understand that this is not going to end well. So, again, I make these wild predictions hoping that I'm wrong, and then you see stuff like Capitol Hill, and I'm just shrugging my hands what do you... Yeah. So again, collapse of the ecosystems there, and considerations having to be made, because they have temperature increases, and then also with climate change, our atmosphere becomes more moist, so then there's the wet bulb effect to look out for. So there's so many different factors, and I keep telling I keep putting my head in I gotta settle down and buy a house or something if I ever get enough money for it. But yeah, I don't know if I want to settle down in Texas, because the summer here is terrible, and already we're experiencing our January, but honestly, it's not even that cold. Let's see here, because it's been kind of almost room temperature. So it's 66 degrees. So it's not cold, but it's still I can go around just wearing regular clothes. Anyway, I'm kind of getting off track, but we're seeing the effects But then again, we have like extreme weather effects. Like we had like a winter storm, and here in Texas we had some rain, or I should say snow. We had snow and plenty of rain. And also in Madrid, so we also had like plenty of snowstorms around the world. So it's not just here, but that's another topic of conversation about the polar vortex and just the weather patterns that are occurring because of this temperature increase, because the poles no longer have that balance. So there's so many different factors that this global warming can create. And we make so many different projections and predictions. We really don't know how this is going to end. But I wanted to at least look at, not really an article, but just something that I find pretty interesting, where this is basically a time lapse. It's from Google Earth Engine. And so it has the whole planet, and it's basically a time lapse from 1984 to 2018. And it kind of illustrates the different effects, or just the changes that we see through the planet. So I want to look at, I don't have a screen recording, but I'm going to look at an area like Brazil in the Amazon rainforest. So I'm going to go to 1984. I'm going to look at the map. Right, so 1984. I'm just going to go to a random spot in the Amazon. And I'm going to go through the years. And I can see like certain areas where there's expansion. Like, holy crap. So it's green. And I'm looking at like these areas that are clearly logging camps. So it's kind of like a main road. And then the loggers kind of stretch out. I really need like a screen recording of this, but you can definitely look at time lapses of the deforestation in the Amazon. But you go through the years and it keeps growing and growing and going. Yeah. So there's that. Wow. So you have the effects there. But then you can also see something that I'm also noticing is that compared to 1984, it's becoming more desertified. Yeah, it's becoming more desertified. You can also see it there. So it's deforested and also becomes desertified. So there's that. There's portions in Brazil there. Yes, less green. Yeah. Oh, well. Yeah, I highly recommend checking this out. It's Google Earth time-lapse, Google Earth Engine, I should say. And you can definitely check out different parts of the world and see how these changes have occurred. I'm actually over Borneo as well. And in a similar story, you can see that there's more, less green or less heavy forest. So anyway, so that's something to at least pay attention there. But it's easily documented, the effects of our expansion. And it's only been exponential, really. So, it just continues to increase. And before I wrap up, I at least wanted to talk about natural disasters that have been occurring around the world, or at least specifically in Indonesia. And so Indonesia has been, for the last couple of weeks, just been hit hard by different disasters. I'm reading this from ABC Net, or it's Australian ABC, I think. And they're saying at least 160 people have died in the first weeks of 2021. Quote, "This year has only just begun, but already Indonesia has been hit with fatal earthquakes, deadly landslides, and volcanic eruptions. The Indonesian National Board for Disaster Management Agency said there has been a staggering 171 natural disasters in Indonesia in the first 3 weeks of 2021 alone. Most are in the form of floods, hurricanes, and landslides. Professor Wiku Adhyasmito from BNBP, who is also the National COVID-19 Task Force spokesperson, said in a press conference this week. Most are in the form of floods, hurricanes, and landslides. Professor Wiku Adhyasmito from BNBP, who is also the National COVID-19 Task Force spokesperson, said in a press conference this week. In the month of January last year, Indonesia recorded 297 disasters, including floods in the Jakarta metropolitan area and landslides in West Java. But this year's disasters have been more deadly. 160 people died so far in January 2021, compared to 91 people who lost their lives in January 2020. Environmental disasters are not unusual for Indonesia, with the country recording a total of 291 disasters in 2020. The archipelago also sits in the Pacific Ring of Fire, where tectonic plates collide, causing frequent volcanic activity as well as earthquakes. But environmentalists say forest destruction and climate change are impacting the severity of the disasters. Greenpeace Indonesia told the ABC that floods, landslides, and forest fires have dominated the list of disasters in Indonesia in recent years, particularly in areas where forest conditions were already critical. It's strongly related to the accumulated damage to forests that have an impact on climate change, said Ari Rompas, the forest campaign team leader at Greenpeace Indonesia. So the ecosystem is disrupted and is impacted in floods, landslides, drought, and forest fires. Almost 1 million people displaced. South Kalimantan on Borneo Island declared a state of emergency last week after heavy rainfall and flooding displaced tens of thousands of people. In my entire life, this is the worst flood ever, local resident Ratna Dwi Sartika told the ABC. She said that in some areas the water level rose to as high as 3 meters and many residents were trapped in their homes. On Friday last week, a 6.2 magnitude earthquake in South Sulawesi killed at least 90 people and left thousands homeless. Days after the deadly earthquake, Semeru volcano in East Java erupted, spewing hot ash clouds as far as 4.5 kilometers away. Villages in the mountains have been told to stay on alert for ongoing volcanic activities, and earlier this month, landslides were reported in Cihanhuang village in the Sumedang district of West Java, 150 kilometers southeast of Jakarta. Local authorities in West Java said a total of 40 victims who died in the landslide have been found. The BNBP said at least 160 people have died, more than 960 were injured, and more than 930,000 people have been displaced in total due to the series of disasters. Earlier this week, President Joko Widodo visited Banjarmasin in South Kalimantan to monitor the floods that have inundated the area for more than a week. He said Borneo Island hasn't experienced flooding in half a century. The rainfall was very high for almost 10 consecutive days, so the capacity for the Barito River overflowed to 10 districts. Mr. Widodo said during an online press conference on Monday. A day later, Mr. Widodo also visited the places and victims affected by the earthquake in West Sulawesi. Ridwan Ali Mudin, a local resident in West Sulawesi, said the local government's response wasn't optimal. He said it seemed that the assistance was more focused on Mamuju, the capital city of West Sulawesi province, while the most affected areas were 3 regencies close to the epicenter. We could see the delay of distributing aid. Many displaced people have put signboards on the road to ask for donations, Mr. Ali Mudin told the ABC. Recently, people were fighting over aid packages when the cars distributed relief came. And I'll continue with that. They talk about the loss of forest and also just a vicious cycle. And as they said before, they have the loss of these forests, and then they get heavy rainfall, which causes landslides. It's a cycle, and it repeats itself. But yeah, they're getting hit hard. They're getting hit really hard. And it's very interesting that I've heard nothing about this from mainstream American sources. I mean, they hardly ever cover any kind of natural disasters unless it's like a hurricane. Then everybody's on top of that. But when it comes to like a systemic environmental crisis, they're nowhere to be found. So it's interesting to see just this happening, and then it's kind of increasing, because they're showing how January from last year wasn't as bad, and then just the effects there. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight this story. There's much to discuss, at least in terms of forest loss. They're saying 9.4 million hectares of primary forest in the past 20 years have been lost. And yeah, deforestation and environmental destruction contribute to these disasters. So yeah, it's in a way it's kind of a self-inflicted wound, but it's just really just Mother Nature setting the record straight with humanity. But then of course people get caught in the thick of this, and there's also the correlation of deforestation and the palm tree plantations. I mean, yeah, palm oil for sure has certainly contributed to many environmental and ecological effects. So yeah. But with that being said, and I know there was much that I discussed, and there's probably a lot more that I could have touched up on, but I'll just get to it on the next episode. Before I actually wrap up this episode, I did want to talk about just something that I'm doing with my own personal life. And I did say that I wanted to do a camping trip, just to at least get out in the field. And I did, for at least a night, just camp and out in the woods and set up a fire, just to at least get comfortable out in the wilderness. And yeah, I mean, I in a way I also did it just to get acquainted with my bug out, quote unquote bug out location. But really it's on public land, so it's not really something that I can claim. It's really just a place that I can hide out until somebody else comes knocking. But I really just went there just to get acquainted, and I did a bit of archery practice, and I'm getting the hang of it, surprisingly. I think playing games like Kingdom Come Deliverance helped me out, just getting the basics of archery under. Yeah, I wanted to at least continue with that. Maybe in the next couple of weeks, going out and doing a proper camp. And I keep saying I want to hunt, but really more to scout out the area. I don't really feel like having to. I don't really want to deal with a whole dead animal, having to skin it and then harvest the meat. Although I am telling myself now that because not only am I trying to do the training regimen, but also just trying to get into better health and better diet. And I told myself that I wasn't going to get any kind of meat from the supermarket. The only meat that I'm going to get is when I'm out hunting. So, I mean, I'll get eggs or sandwich meat or something like that, but I won't get any chicken or any red meat. So I'm really going to see how I can fare with that. It's a bit of a challenge for myself. But also just trying to get a plan in order. Because I'll be honest, I kind of, with this pandemic, I gained a lot of my weight that I lost back. So that's something that I have to get in order. But, it's also just fitness, and also just, understanding nutrition, because I understand now getting supplements in order. I have a whole plan down. So it really is just a matter of following through with it and just discipline and really just getting some control back. Because I'll be honest, the last couple of months and weeks, a lot of comfort eating, a lot of just feeling sorry for myself. But at the same time, I think that's also just the winter weather that affects me. But now I'm looking up and looking to improve and move forward. And not just with my own life, but also with this show. Because I'll be honest, there are some moments where I'm like, damn, this sucks. But again, I'm still very new to this, so I cut myself some slack. But there are far better. I'm always looking at different YouTubers or different content creators and podcasters who are far more talented and far better production than I can ever put out, at least right now. But yeah. But as I said, and I'll kind of refer back to a point that I made earlier in the episode, the whole Capitol Hill insurrection really highlighted where people stand and where their reality and their worldviews are. Because those that have been downplaying this insurrection, now I can't really take them seriously, and I never should have. Now I realize, damn, I really, and again, I don't like calling people out, but podcasters like Tim Pool that I have listened to in the past, they were able to sway me, but now that he's and I re-listened to Vosh and his debate with Tim Pool, and Vosh is certainly somebody that I highly recommend. Although, I mean, yeah, he's a sociology major, so of course it's going to be far more intellectual, very well spoken. Yeah, so it's certainly something that I need to brush myself up on and again do more research on. But my point being is just getting my work in order, getting my research in order, just producing the best content possible. Because believe me, every time I release something, I'm like, this sucks. So I just gotta continue on and just hope for the best. But regardless, I hope that this episode, and this being the first new episode of the year, we'll just see how things unfold and where our paths lead with this new administration, a new era for America, we could say. But again, we still don't know what's going to happen. So we can make every prediction we can, but we'll have to see. But regardless, I want to thank those of you who are tuning in, who bear with me, and who stayed to the end. And if you're listening to this on the public space, you're getting the 48-hour difference. So if you went to my Patreon, you would be able to get early access, exclusive access for 48 hours. And you can just do that for $1. Again, if you don't feel that my work is worth donating to, then that's fine. That's just something that I have to improve on. But again, I appreciate y'all listening in and tuning in and hearing what I have to say, and hopefully y'all are keeping your heads up and just living life with whatever you can. But yeah, appreciate y'all. Hope for the best, and we'll see what happens. But thanks for tuning in.